Get everything kicked off here. Welcome everybody on today. On Thursday, we do webinars once a month, and we thank everybody who joins. We've got a lot of folks who, I recognize repeat names that are coming in, so thank you for joining. Make sure that you keep an eye out. Once again, we do webinars about this time every month, and the topics do change and vary. If you do have a suggestion for a topic, please feel free to you put that in the question box or email it in. So once again, thank you very much. My name is Andy Crawford. I'm with Pensight. I'm a Director of Business Development. I'm located in Atlanta, Georgia. We also have on the phone Dr. Martin Lanick, who is the founder and CEO of Pensight. He is the brains behind the operation who devised our tools. And if you're not familiar with Pensight, we are a live virtual assessment. So we utilize assessment centers, which are the most highly validated form of assessment in the industry, and combine it with an Uber-style car technology. So your candidates, your employees who you're trying to measure their readiness for leadership, you're trying to measure where they need development, their gaps, we can help you identify those gaps, and people can take it all over the world. Doesn't matter where they're at, as long as they have a desk and a computer, you can get them set up for success. You can see those are some of our key clients that we work with globally, and had a lot of success, build a lot of excitement with what we do because we are such a new technology. Martin, I'll let you go ahead and forward us the next slide there.
There we go.
Well, once again, we're really going to, today we're going to talk about performance management. We're going to talk about leadership development, because one of the things that we discuss with our clients on a daily basis, many of you may or may not know that today U.S. businesses spend over $170 billion, that's right, that's $1 billion, on leadership-based curriculum. And the majority of those dollars are being spent on leadership training. But here's the thing. You don't train leaders, you develop them. If it were easy as putting a training program in place, everybody who went through it would be a successful leader. But there's not. There's a very subtle yet important distinction between the two, between training and development. Today we're gonna really focus in on the development aspect of it, because that's key. That's where companies are really driving success and having success with it versus your traditional performance review with a curriculum-based training that occurs after that, because as we're finding, traditional training just isn't working. Martin, I'll let you advance us from there. The companies you're looking at on the screen right now, what do they all have in common? What they have in common is that they're getting rid of performance appraisals, because they, number one, you're finding a huge, over 90% of employees don't feel they work, don't feel that they're really pertinent to what they're doing. They feel it's an exercise in futility. I can give you examples from my days at Xerox when it was performance review time of year again, and I would scramble to put everything together. I'd go back through and look at my metrics and determine where you did for the year and what you've been doing and how it measured up, which is easy, which is an easy thing for people to do. If I can look at the metrics and pull numbers out of it, I can put that together in a performance review. But how does that rate to, and how does that link to the development of your employees? We're finding through studies that it doesn't necessarily link to it. Part of the problem is, number one, when traditional training programs, you bring them in for a day or two, you overwhelm them with material. As my one buddy always put it, he goes, you put a fire hose in my mouth and you turn it on, and I'm really not swallowing a lot of the water. It's spilling out all over. So it's throwing too much at them at one time. It's also, with employees, it's having the training department decide on the curriculum instead of really checking with and trying to figure out what the folks need to learn. Obviously, when you do a big spray and pray, sometimes as we call it, with the training programs, you're going to have some people who absorb the information and can use it. But you're going to have the majority of them who do not. Number one, they don't either feel it's pertinent to them. Number two, they don't understand it. But probably one of the biggest things is you do that big training program, they're there for 1 or 2 days, everybody's fired up, everybody's excited, and then everybody goes home. What happens then? That information sits there. So we really believe that there needs to be follow-up, and we're going to be discussing that today. So we think the follow-up piece of it is very, very important. Martin, I'll let you advance this again there.
Thank you, Andy. So just a bit about background on myself. So by training, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So that's the perspective that I come from and I bring to the table. And as Andy pointed out, the topic of today is really focused on leadership development apps. So Andy talks about performance appraisals and how many organizations, very well-known organizations like IBM, Accenture, Adobe, are getting rid of performance appraisals. And one of the reasons is that the whole idea behind performance appraisals is to motivate employees and get them to reach higher goals. But what we're finding is that it really doesn't work that way. It doesn't help us achieve those goals. So there is a rush currently in the market to identify new ways and redesign the whole way how we go about performance appraisals. And there is a whole group of startups that are offering leadership development apps mushrooming up that are trying to solve this problem, and that's going to be our focus. But the key reason why performance appraisal doesn't work is that employees don't develop and don't change based on feedback they receive once a year. So there needs to be continuous feedback, and the development, as Andy rightfully pointed out, needs to be continuous. So the classroom training that we've got used to, or maybe e-learning, just doesn't bring the results that we expected. So I'm going to show you on the next slide. So this is the classic forgetting curve from cognitive psychology. So this is what happens with information that participants on our training programs receive. Even 20 minutes in, they forget about 60% of that information. And by the time, or a month from now, they only retain about 20% of that information. So a lot of the information that, or large majority of the information that people are exposed to, they actually forget, and they never apply to the job unless there's that follow-up. So going back to this idea of continuous development and distinguishing from training is really important, and that's what leadership development apps are really trying to achieve today. So Andy talked about the distinction between training and development, and that's something that we've been discussing in the area of industrial psychology and then also HR development functions for at least a couple decades. But I think it's quite important to highlight, because this will be important as we look at the criteria that you should use to select which leadership development app is really best suited for your organization and for your target population in the organization. So when we talk about training, we think of it as a one-time event. So this could be a motivational speaker that you bring in. It could be a workshop, any kind of classroom-based or e-learning modules that are thought of as one-time events. So that's what we think of training. And in a training environment, the person is really a passive recipient. So they sit there and they receive the information, very similar to what you're doing right now. So we're spitting all this information, and then you are sitting on the other side in front of your computer and are a passive recipient of this information. And the focus of training is really on knowledge acquisition. So we're not teaching skills necessarily, but we're giving knowledge to individuals. Now, when you contrast that with development, when we think of development, it's a continuous process. So it's not a one-time event. It happens day over day over day over day, and it doesn't stop. So development really continuous on maybe 3-month, year-long basis. And the key difference is that the person or learner is an active participant in this. So they are experiencing different situations and they are learning through these experiences. And the focus is on skill acquisition. So now you're teaching them how to develop skills rather than acquire knowledge. And the distinction here is quite subtle, as Andy pointed out, but very important. So for those of you who have studied any musical instrument, the knowledge acquisition is that music theory, right? When you are learning how to read music, how to read notes. But skill acquisition was when you were practicing on the violin or the piano. So that's the distinction. And the key here is that you can be sitting at home reading or learning how to read music all day long, but unless you touch the piano or the violin, you're not going to know how to play. So that's the key distinction between knowledge and skill acquisition. And because our training focuses on knowledge, it is subject to the forgetting curve. And statistics that look at the transfer of training, so how much of that training is not only remembered but then also applied to the job. The research shows that about 10% on average of what is presented in training ends up transferring to the job, and people actually apply to the job. So it's a very, very small number, and this is why we see such a big rise in leadership development apps. So when we think of development, really the guiding principle behind development is this latest research that's coming from neuroscience on how habits are formed. Because ultimately, when you think about it, every competency that you're trying to develop, such as emotional intelligence or planning and organizing, delegation, empowering others, innovation, these all are essentially habits for the individuals. And they're good habits and they're bad habits. So when you think of development, really think of it as a way to help the individual build habits. And we know from research in neuroscience that there are 4 key things that are necessary for people to form habits. The first one is that there has to be one big insight. So there has to be some kind of event, whether it's feedback or whether it's an experience that the person has that really shapes them and has them look at the situation, their own skill set in a different light. So they get that one big insight, and that creates the motivation and the energy to change their behavior. So that's the absolutely necessary prerequisite. And once they have that big insight, then they need to pick very specific action, so very specific behavior that they repeat day over day. And it has to be small, it has to be actionable, it has to be something that they can do 5 minutes a day. And then the third component here is practice. So research shows that on average it takes a person 66 days of repetition of this one behavior before it becomes automatic, and means that they do this behavior without even thinking about it. So just consider last time you moved house. It took you about 2-3 months before you remembered where you put your keys, because you were building a habit, right? You started putting your keys in one place, then another place, and through repetition you conditioned and trained yourself to be putting your keys in the same place, and then you remember where they are because it's automated. You don't even have to think about it, and you've built a habit of putting your keys in one place, and hence you remember where they are. So this is the basic formula that is then necessary in order to develop effective leadership skills when we especially think about them as habits. Now, creating that one big insight is very difficult to do. So for some people, it's going to be an experience that they have on the job. For some people, it could be things like a stretch assignment or change of role that really gives them the insight that they need to change and they need to develop skills. But for others, it's really assessment. And there's a whole set of assessments that we use for this purpose, and they have their pros and their cons. So on the cheap side, you have basic tests. So this is point and click type of test, whether it's a multiple choice or a strongly agree to strongly disagree type of personality test like Myers-Briggs or DISC. So on the positive side, these are very inexpensive and quick. So you can get these tests for $20, $30. But on the negative side, they have low validity, which means that they're not going to be as accurate in telling you what the person's strengths and development needs are. So as a result, they're going to create limited insights, and they're not immediately actionable because you are giving feedback to people in terms of their personality. And if you try to change somebody's personality, research shows that it takes on average 10 years. So I doubt that you will be spending 10 years in developing the individual so that you are changing their personality. So they are going to be limited in their ability to create that one big insight for the person to launch this habit building formula and create that energy to change. 360-degree feedback tools, they're another assessment option that has been frequently used in organizations. Again, they are inexpensive, but on the surface, there's quite a bit of hidden costs. So when you add up the time that managers and people in the organization have to spend filling out these surveys, it adds up very, very quickly. So there is a lot of hidden costs behind 360-degree feedback tools. The administration is generally online, so fairly easy to do. But on the negative side, 360-degree feedback tools tend to create quite a bit of resistance. So people are not readily accepting that feedback. And as a result, if they don't accept the feedback, it won't be as effective in creating that one big insight that you're looking for to change the person's behavior. And then the last type of assessment, so you might be familiar with the term assessment center or simulation assessment. So these are the assessments where you actually place the person in a fictitious company and then you present different leadership challenges to them and you see how they react. So these are on the expensive side, of course, because you have live role players, you have live industrial psychologists that are making the ratings. They also require higher time commitment. So these assessments would take, in the virtual assessment, simulation assessment, would take about 3 hours on average. But on the flip side, so yes, they are expensive, they take more time, but they have highest validity, so they are going to be most accurate in predicting or assessing the person's strengths, development needs, and as a result, they can create powerful insights. They also people are much more likely to accept that feedback because they have high face validity. So people know and can judge how they are doing as they are going through the simulation assessment. All right, so the bottom line, when you're deciding which leadership development apps to use, there are two key criteria. The first one is it's got to focus on continuous development and preferably on the habit building. So it's got to be focused on one specific action, behavior, provide a way to track success and track accomplishment of that behavior on a daily basis. And then second, it's got to give feedback on a continuous basis so people know as they are developing whether they're on the right track or not. So this is the bottom line that research would suggest. It's got to be continuous development, continuous feedback. This is why in the first place we're getting rid of performance management as it is today and questioning the efficacy of training. So here's the key question that you come to this webinar with. So which app is right for your organization? So I'll walk you through the decision criteria. So first, when you're evaluating the leadership development apps on the market, there are three types of information that you need to ask yourself, or three types of questions you need to ask yourself internally. First, who is this app designed for? Second, how is it going to help them train? And third, what is it going to develop? So let's start with the who. So you should be investing any kind of development dollars in people who have the highest potential to grow. This can be determined with learning agility measures or with a combination of different assessments. But you always want to pick the people who have the highest potential to grow because they are going to benefit the most from the training. And generally when you're applying any kind of new leadership development app or solution, my recommendation is always start with a pilot test, pick a small group, and then refine it. Usually organizations would start with their high potential group or successors for key positions. The next question or the next bucket of questions has to do with how you are going to develop them. So there you have two different reasons probably why you are looking at leadership development apps. The first one is that you want to give continuous development processes to people and structure around that. And then the second one is that you probably want to reach employees on the go. So these are two different populations. If you are trying to give people continuous development, then you should be looking for apps that are based on this habit building formula. So one small behavior practiced on a daily basis with feedback. If you are looking to reach employees who are on the go, then you are really looking at leadership development apps that can deploy or administer very small just-in-time learning modules. So small videos, reading lists, just bits of information. But it's readily available to these individuals. And then, of course, the key question is, well, what should they be developing? And there, the key is alignment between your strategy. So what do these leaders need to support? What are the strategic goals? And then how do those compare to the individual gaps of those individuals? So what are the development needs of the individual, and how do those compare to the strategy of the business that these leaders need to support? So here are the key questions to ask yourself. I'll give you three key questions. The first one is, does the app actually develop the skills leaders need to develop to support your business strategy? And this is not an easy question to answer. So first we have to look at what is the strategy, and then what are the individual development gaps of that individual. So ideally, the app is focused on the middle space. So there's an overlap between where the business is going, what leaders need to actually accomplish in the business, and what their development gaps are. And that's what you want to target with the leadership development app. So let me give you an example. So let's say that your business is looking to increase customer satisfaction. So we know from our research at Pinsight that there are 5 key skills or competencies that are most critical for leaders to be able to achieve higher customer satisfaction. The first one is the leader has to be able to focus on customers. Then they have to be able to change things in the business. So they got to be able to create buy-in and eliminate any kind of barriers to change. And they have to work with individual team members to put a solid team together and then mentor and coach them to develop their skills. So these are the most important areas for the individual leaders to develop if you are looking to increase customer satisfaction as your business goal. Now, a different example here, let's say that your business strategy is now to improve efficiency of the business. So you have different set of skills that these leaders need to develop. There's ability to implement strategy, planning, organizing work, creating urgency, and then some of the analytical decision-making type of skills and competencies. So again, this will give you this ability to link the development needs of the individual with the business strategy, will give the direction to your leadership development app. So you'll know exactly what are the areas where each individual needs to develop. So that's the first question, and how you can possibly answer the first question. The second question when you are evaluating leadership development apps is asking yourself, does it provide daily actionable exercises and a way to track progress? And this is very important because this goes back to the habit building formula. And we know through decades of research that, yes, this is the process that people build habits. And that's ultimately what you want to do. So you want to use an app that will help to build positive, good habits in the workplace. So here is an example. Let's say that you are trying to develop empowering skills in your leaders. So what would an actionable, simple behavior look like? Maybe you can have your leaders practice asking 2-3 questions instead of giving their opinion. Examples: what have you tried? What else could you do? So as simple as this. So it's a very actionable behavior, right? So they, instead of giving their opinion, they'll pause and rather ask 2-3 questions first. And then we actually give them the questions here. So this is an example of a very actionable, simple behavior that leaders can start practicing if they want to improve their empowering skills. They need to practice this for 66 days. That's what research shows, that the average person takes 66 days of practice before the behavior becomes automatic. So your leadership development app should be able to track this progress. We know that logging repetitions will help to keep people on track. So you are able to monitor whether they are actually practicing this behavior. All right, and the third question is feedback. So as you are evaluating the leadership development apps, ask yourself, is there a feedback loop built into the system? Do people get feedback as they are working on their development? And then most importantly, where does this feedback come from? So last thing you want to do is create more work for other people in the organization. And several of the apps on the market have mini 360-degree feedback as part of the development process. But if this is deployed too frequently, you are over-surveying the employees, and you are creating a burden on other people in the organization. So be careful where that feedback is actually coming from, because if it's coming from written feedback from other people in the organization, the time it takes to actually complete this feedback could be a big negative of the entire process, and then could actually slow down the adoption. So as you are looking for apps, here are the 3 criteria that you should consider. So look for apps that direct leaders to practice an actionable behavior on a daily basis. Look for apps that focus on the skills that leaders need to develop to support your strategy. So there's got to be that alignment between individual development needs and the strategy of the business. And look for apps that offer frequent feedback that does not create burden on others in the organization. So these are the first 3 criteria you should look at as you are evaluating leadership development apps. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a whole list of startups. We give you just a starting point. So these are the 5 that have been getting a lot of traction lately. So this would be a good starting point for you as you are evaluating apps and considering bringing those apps to your business to support your development initiatives. So here you have the list, websites, and again, this is not by any means exhaustive list, but it's a starting point to give you some ideas to look for. Good. So with that, Andy, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we've had several that have come in. One of them, they were wanting to know if we could share the study that you showed, and I believe it said Lally on the habit-forming formula.
Yes.
So
yes.
if we've got that available, we can.
Yeah, if you can give us your email address, I'll be happy to send it to you.
Yeah, we can get out there. Although I do have to dispute you a little bit on the habit-forming formula. My teenage daughter and her car keys. We've been working with her now for well over 80 days, and they're still not in the same place. So
right.
I think we may have some negative parts there. But no, yeah. Some of the other questions that came in. Let me go through them here. One of the questions came in: how can they be sure that the development is increasing the staff's productivity?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
They wanted to know, how can you ensure that the development program is increasing the staff's productivity? And I guess, I guess what kind of measurement points can you add to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So whatever productivity metrics that you use in the organization. So you would look at what is the productivity of the people before you launch the app and then after you launch the app, and you compare those two. And then ideally you would have also a control group. So you would have a group that basically is you are tracking with their productivity over the same time, but they are not they don't have access to that app. So that would be a very, very basic research design to compare whether that app is actually increasing productivity.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question is, how do you measure the participants' satisfaction, and is that important?
Yes, of course. So with participant satisfaction, usually that's done through surveys, so kind of the smiley sheets that we've used in training before. And it is important. I think the behavior change is more important, of course, because that's where you see the results. But how people are approaching and their opinion of that of the app is, of course, important because it's going to impact their ability or the adoption rate in the organization. If people don't like the app, they're not going to use it. So as part of your pilot, we always encourage clients to have a perception survey of some sort, so satisfaction survey, right? Do you use this app? Do you see that? Do you think it's helping you? What are the parts you like? What are the parts that you don't like?
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question that came in, let me read through this real quick. Okay, they're asking, should the content of your development program be generic, or should you write it so it's more specific to your organization?
Yeah, it's a combination. It depends again on what are the competencies that you're trying to develop or the skills, right? If you have unique skills like vision, strategy, leadership, right? If you have that unique competency that is really made for your organization, then you need to develop your own content. Because it's unlikely that there is going to be content readily available out there. But if you're developing more generic type of leadership skills like planning, organizing, influencing others, empowering, delegating, there is a lot of content already available for you, so you don't have to reinvent that wheel.
Okay, great. Next question is, and this is, I think, getting more specific to the programs that you listed, the apps you listed. They were wanting to know, are these scalable regardless of the size of the organization?
Yeah, that really depends on the vendor. So some of them are more established organizations, some of them are startups. So I would encourage you to do some digging and bring this question up as you are talking to that organization.
Okay, great. The next question that came in, should you design your development program that would also include professional certification, or are those both separate items?
I would view them as separate items, yeah. So certification is more of a testing type of approach.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the next question. Have you seen any recent changes in the approach to feedback? And then the follow-up on it is, other than the 360 approach, are these apps using any different approaches?
Yeah, so the ones that do use feedback so far, majority of them do rely on 360-degree feedback, yes. That is the one that I've seen most often. I think there are some apps now that are starting to experiment with text analytics, so they would make the feedback automated. But I think we're still about 6 months to a year out before that research is completed and before those applications are available.
And I guess I kind of have a question on that, which because I know in typical performance reviews, a lot of the 360 feedback, there's some at times disagreement on what is observed and what the people feel how they're performing. How do you really how do you address that when there's a wide gap between what is perceived and what is reality, especially on the employee's part?
Yeah, that's that's tough. So our research based on acceptance of assessment feedback shows that a lot of those differences tend to be misunderstandings of what is being measured or assessed, right? So, for example, one person understands planning and organizing differently than their supervisor or their colleagues, right? So there's not always alignment between how those competencies are understood by people and what those competencies look like on the job. So you oftentimes get lower feedback from others than yourself, thinking I'm good at planning organizing, but other people have different criteria for how they're evaluating it or different understanding of what it really means to plan and organize. So a lot of that comes really from misunderstanding and lack of calibration on what is really meant by the competencies.
Okay. The next question, do these app vendors usually have IO psychologists on staff? How do we know they're credible, or is it best to use them as platforms but create your own content? So there's really three questions there.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes. You know what? I'm more familiar with some, less with others, but I can tell you in general, these apps are usually sit in the HR technology side more than the consulting. So especially the more innovative ones. So they are mainly founded by people who are not IO psychologists. The better ones do tend to employ IO psychologists, so it really depends on the vendor. Of course, there are the classic vendors like DDI who do have whole armies of IO psychologists that are developing those apps. But from my experience, they tend to be less innovative, so they tend to be more traditional in their approach.
Okay. All right.
How do you know if they're credible?
Yes.
Do your research. So that's again one of the great questions that I would add to the list is, who has developed this content, and is this content been validated?
Okay. And let's see, we've got. Did you address, or is it best to use them as platforms, create your own content?
Yeah, it depends. I would say start with pilot. So if you do decide you find a vendor that you like, always pilot first on a small scale, and then one of the criteria of the pilot, one of the questions that will be answered is how much customization is really required. Is there content helping, and is it useful, or do you need to customize it and build your own content? So that should be part of the question that is asked during the pilot.
Okay. The next question says, we have a competency model in place. How do you link your competency model to potential development gaps?
Yes, absolutely, assessments. So that goes back to the perceived versus actual development needs that people have. So first step, once you do have a competency model, run an assessment before you even start developing to understand what are the development needs of this person. And then, of course, there's a whole set of assessments that you can use for development purposes. The ones that are going to be very behavior-oriented and are going to be a most accurate measure of competencies are going to be simulation assessments or assessment centers. So there you can actually measure where the person is today on each competency and then identify the gaps. Good. I think we have time for one more question, Andy.
All right. The next one is, have you seen any rewards, compensation or otherwise, tied to aggregated feedback in these apps?
Not yet. I think that's the next phase. So right now, the HR tech market is really focused on redefining and restructuring performance appraisals and the whole area of performance management. once they find a validated method that actually does work, I think, and organizations start feeling more comfortable with it, I think then you will see the application or the linkages with compensation and reward systems that tag on top of it. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right. Well, Martin, as always, thank you very much. I think this has been a great little lunch hour for everybody here. Want to thank you again for providing your expertise. Want to encourage anybody, if you've got any additional questions, please feel free to follow up with us at our email addresses listed on the screen right there. Martin, any closing comments?
Yes, we do have a survey. So as Andy mentioned, we run these webinars on a monthly basis. If you did find it useful, please let us know. If you see any areas for improvement, please let us know as well. We really appreciate that feedback. It'll take you 2 seconds to answer those 3 questions. And I want to thank everybody for spending the half an hour here with us.
Everybody have a great 3-day weekend and be safe. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.